Generally speaking, most of us prefer to forget that life can be ugly, whether that's disease, destitution, or something about holding the door. But on the plus side, reality checks like this can be quite uplifting because it shows how far we've come. Our ancestors puzzled out mathematics despite rampant disease and the threat of being pillaged, for heaven's sake. Fast forward a few centuries and we're firing satellites toward the other end of space. It's interesting when you apply that logic to something like Star Wars. It's got gizmos that let you cover light years in minutes, but this makes you wonder what the galaxy looked like before they were developed. We've got very little idea now the expanded universe has been booted unceremoniously from canon. Books, comics, and games before Disney acquired the franchise no longer count, leaving a gaping hole in the timeline before The Phantom Menace. What's left behind is a less romantic universe. Millennia-old hyperspace sextants in The Force Awakens visual dictionary would suggest a simpler time, one where faster-than-light travel wasn't possible. I'd assume they were used in charting hyperspace, which is apparently an alternate dimension populated by space whales, supported by the, in inverted commas, historical need for carbonite stasis to survive long journeys beforehand. As with Alien, this kind of Star Trekking isn't exactly glamorous. For starters, astronauts might wake up to a universe that's a little different from the one they remember. Then you've got to factor in mind benders like time dilation, where time is relative and dependent on the rate you're travelling. In other words, it's a low-key kind of time travel. Those having a jolly around space may find that everyone else has aged faster than them. Basically, it's not a great alternative. You need months to reach another planet. Swap that for decades when going to a different solar system. Colonies will probably have been established far closer to home as a result. They'd also be much smaller than those seen on film because it's insanely expensive to transport supplies across space. According to mining company Planetary Resources, in an interview with the BBC, shipping enough water for 6 people on the International Space Station costs $2 billion per year. Even getting out of the atmosphere is pricey. You need an absurd amount of energy to clear gravitational pull. As NASA researcher Kevin Fong noted in The Observer, making sure vehicles achieve an orbit wide enough to get it to miss both the Earth and the upper layers of the atmosphere, you need to travel at around 17,500 miles per hour. These outposts would probably be isolated too. Help is fairly hard to come by out there, particularly when it takes weeks to arrive. This leaves settlers to fend for themselves. Beside foreign weather, flora and fauna, they're stranded on a planet that may not even have any oxygen. And what would living on another planet do to us? Although Star Wars never worried about reality, and nor should it, seeing as it's a story about space wizards, this wouldn't do wonders for our health. Less gravity wastes bones and musculature, and that's before we even get started on radiation. Then you've got to consider the psychological impact of being cut off, not to mention other people being, well, other people. Astrobiologist Charles Cockle pointed out to the Beeb that space is a tyranny-prone environment. If somebody gets control of oxygen, they could very well have control over the whole population and could threaten dire consequences in return for extraordinary levels of power. It may sound ridiculous, but experts are already planning a Bill of Rights to avoid disagreements, shall we say, not to mention ways of toppling interstellar dictatorships. In a nutshell, it's a lifestyle which doesn't exactly go in for luxury. The fact that Maz Kanata's pirate empire has existed for 1,000 years indicates a frontier more like the Wild West than anything else. Which raises a question: did they piece this all together through trial and error, or were they sped along by first contact with one of the series' extraterrestrial races? Perhaps the answer is neither. The Tarkin novel references an ancient civilization which constructed interstellar weapons of mass destruction. This became an inspiration for the Death Star, so it's possible the remains of an older society provided the technological leap needed, a la Mass Effect. No matter what their origin is, it puts the Empire's advancement into context. It must have taken decades at the very least to reach that stage, especially when those efforts had to have been funded by competing nations. It's wild and unnecessary speculation on my part, obviously, but that's the fun of it. What we don't know is often more entertaining than what we do. We can fill in the gaps ourselves. Many criticise the removal of expanded universe content. This is my counter-argument.